beside her. After the event, she approached him again. I don't expect redemption, she said, but I'd like to help elevate. I want to donate. Quietly, no press, Elijah studied her. I don't need your money, he replied. But the kids do, she smiled weakly. Then we have a deal, he nodded. That night, she didn't sleep easy, but she slept better than she had in days. And Elijah, he went home, hugged his daughter, and watched Ava hand out scholarship letters to 5 more students. Still don't want to post a statement, she teased. No, Elijah smiled. Let the world talk. We've got work to do. As days passed, Eleanor kept her word. No press, no grand announcements. Just quiet, consistent action. A month later, a transfer of $3 million appeared in the Elevate Project's account anonymously. But Elijah knew. She didn't ask for acknowledgement. She didn't attend the ceremonies. Instead, she showed up in small ways, visiting schools under a different name, writing curriculum grants, sending new laptops to underserved communities. Slowly, she began to understand the world outside her glass tower. One afternoon, Eleanor sat in a dusty folding chair in a community center in Newark, watching Elijah speak to a group of teenagers. You know what power is, Elijah said. It's not your last name. It's not your money. It's what you do when no one's watching. It's what you do when everyone's watching and expects you to fail. A boy raised his hand. Even if people hate you, especially then, Elijah said, because you don't change hearts by yelling. You change them by showing up. Eleanor looked down. Her hands trembled in her lap. She had been that person, the one who judged, the one who turned her back, but she was showing up now, quietly. After the session, Elijah walked over. Didn't expect to see you here. I didn't come to be seen, she said. I came to listen, he nodded. Then, let's keep building. They started to meet weekly, not in ballrooms, not in boardrooms, but in neighborhoods. Harlem, South Bronx, Oakland, Atlanta. They listened to kids, parents, teachers. They built new programs, internships, paid mentorships. Ava, now promoted to executive director of Elevate, started referring to the collaboration as redemption in motion. Then came the call from Washington, President Amara Franklin, the first Black female president of the United States, had been following the Elevate Project for months. She requested a private meeting with Elijah in the Oval Office under the gold-trimmed ceiling. President Franklin shook Elijah's hand firmly. You've done more to close the opportunity gap than any tech CEO in a decade, she said. And I hear Eleanor Van Doren's been working with you. She's come a long way, Elijah said carefully. She's not who she was. People say a lot of things about her, the president said, then smiled. But actions speak. Back in New York, Eleanor received a letter with a presidential seal. Inside, an invitation to the National Task Force on Educational Equity. She called Elijah in a panic. They want me on this panel, national, high level. What if people protest? Then you show up. Elijah said, you show them who you are now. And she did. On the first day of the televised summit, a protester outside held up a sign that read, we remember the hand you wouldn't shake. Cameras panned to Eleanor. She saw it. She didn't look away. She walked over to the young protester, a college sophomore named Jasmine, and extended her hand. I deserve that sign, Eleanor said. But I'm not here to silence you. I'm here to prove to you that I can do better. Jasmine looked at her. Her lip quivered. Then, slowly, she took her hand. Inside the summit, Eleanor spoke not as a billionaire, not as an heiress, but as someone who had once failed and had chosen to change. If we want equity, she said, voice shaking slightly, we must first confront the biases within ourselves. That handshake I refused. It's the reason I'm standing here now. The crowd fell silent. Then applause began, first polite, then thunderous. Months passed. Elijah and Eleanor co-founded Bridgepoint, a tech accelerator for minority-led startups. They raised $50 million in its first year, but the money was never the point. The point was the thousands of young people who now had someone in their corner. On the anniversary of their infamous first meeting, Ava hosted a celebration gala, not at a five-star hotel, but at the newly opened Bridgepoint HQ in Harlem. The walls were lined with photos of students, entrepreneurs, teachers, and volunteers. Eleanor stood near the back, champagne untouched in her hand. Elijah approached. Full circle, he said. I still think about that night, she said. What I said. How small I made you feel. I never felt small, Elijah replied. You tried. But I knew who I was. She looked down. I didn't. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. It was a still from the security footage, the exact moment she shook his hand at the Round Table Summit. I had this printed, he said, not to shame you, but to remember what growth looks like. She stared at the photo. I want to be worthy of this. You already are, Elijah said, but the work never ends. That night, she gave her first public speech since the scandal. She didn't sugarcoat. She didn't excuse. I was wrong. I lived in a bubble. I looked at a brilliant man and saw only my own fears. But that man chose grace, and that grace changed my life. She looked at Elijah, and if he can forgive me, maybe I can learn to forgive myself. Elijah stood and raised his glass. To second chances. The room echoed. To second chances. And somewhere across the city, a little black boy watched a clip of the gala on TV. His mother wiped away a tear. You see that, baby, she said. That man. He didn't yell. He didn't fight dirty. He stood tall. And now they're building a future together. The boy looked up. I want to be like him. You can, she said. You already are.